All right, I will call to order the Yamhill County Board of Commissioners formal session for December 21st, 2023. It is 10 o'clock in the morning, and I will go ahead and lead us in the flag salute.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And just a reminder, this is our last session of 2023, so we will not meet again until January 4th. Okay, next year. Okay, item C is the calendar session. Anything to add to the calendar? Item D is public comment. This time period is reserved for public comment on any topic other than an agenda item, a quasi judicial land use matter, or a topic scheduled for a public hearing. I don't believe we received any written comments, but if there is anyone in the audience who would like to provide comment or online, please raise your virtual hand. Okay, hearing none. We will move on to our presentation, and we are honored to be joined today by our brand new sheriff, Sam Elliott. Welcome, Sheriff. Sheriff Elliott was just sworn in this morning, and I invited him on to just give a little bit of a welcome address, introduce himself to the community in a public forum, and I'm sure you will be seeing more and more of him this coming year. So.
Well, good morning, commissioners. Thank you, Chair. I'm honored to be here to represent the Sheriff's Office, to serve as Sheriff of Yamhill County. I was completely overwhelmed with the support. We had a packed house this morning, and it was just amazing for me to see so many folks from my past in my career in law enforcement, and also to have my family there with me, who have been with me every step of the way for the last 22 plus years. So I really consider myself a Yamhill County native, even though I only moved here when I was 2. So I can't say I was born here, but I've been here for a long time. You know, my kids have attended schools and played sports in Yamhill County, and really it is my home. And so I'm very excited about the opportunities that lay before us. I acknowledge the fact that it's been a rough week for the Sheriff's Office, and we certainly have our work to do in keeping the trust of the community and the public. And I remind myself often that these rare examples of times where that has been betrayed is just that. It's a rare example. And our staff do an amazing job every single day and represent the county and represent the Office of Sheriff very, very well. I would like to just give you a little bit of a brief summary of where things are at with the Sheriff's Office this morning. And these are numbers just since July 1 of this year. So in our corrections division, since July 1 of 2023, our average daily population of adults in custody is 107. Our average daily 1145 population, which are the folks that we're housing for the state, is 6. Our average bed rentals, and this is just since October with our agreement with Washington County, is 11 per day. And then our average number of monthly bookings through the facility is 271. So we're booking on average 271 individuals every month into the facility. On the patrol side of the Sheriff's Office, since July 1 of 2023 through yesterday, we have either responded to or generated 13,677 calls for service. So that is half the year. And of those, almost 2,200 have resulted in a case report or an investigation being opened. For staffing in 2023, we have run 3 recruitments for corrections sergeant. We've had 15 applicants in those 3 recruitments, and 2 individuals that have been selected and promoted to corrections sergeant. We've run 2 recruitments for entry-level deputy. We've had 47 applicants, and we have hired 7 people in 2023. And that includes individuals that have transferred between divisions from corrections to enforcement or vice versa. We've had 2 recruitments for lateral deputies, and we've had 10 applicants and hired 5. So that is a really good ratio that we're attracting folks that are already certified in other places. We've had 1 recruitment for Marine Safety Officer for the seasonal positions. We had 11 applicants and brought on 3 individuals. We ran 1 recruitment for Reserve Deputy Sheriff with 5 applicants and 1 person that has been hired in 2023, and 1 support services recruitment with 7 applicants, and we've hired 2 of those individuals. So where that leaves us today, we have a new enforcement deputy that starts on January 9, and on paper that means we are full in the enforcement division of the sheriff's office. We do have 2 individuals that are still on leave and 3 in the academy that graduate on January 26th. And obviously expect there to be some additional openings as there are promotions and trickle down from promoting captains. Currently, we have 2 vacancies in the corrections division. We have multiple individuals in background, and we have an anticipated retirement at the end of this calendar year from one of our corrections deputies. So that would be a 3rd position. We will be running recruitments to promote 2 new captains, 1 to replace me as the enforcement captain and 1 to replace Captain Lux, who's retiring at the end of the month. And so those I anticipate will go live right after the 1st of the year. The corrections captain position will be an internal and external process. So individuals that are currently not members of the sheriff's office would be able to apply for that. And then our enforcement captain will be an internal only selection process. And then we just had our annual awards and recognition banquet for the office right at the beginning of December. And we recognized our corrections deputy of the year, Tracy Black. He has been with the office since February of 2020, and he came to us with prior experience out of the state of California. We recognized our enforcement deputy of the year, Deputy Jamie Serta. She's been with us this time since November of 2017. She previously worked for us from September of 2011 until December of 2016, when she went to Multnomah County and then returned to us later in 2017. And then our employee of the year, senior support specialist, Monica Saunders, who works split duty at the front counter and also with our civil division. And she's been with the office since April of 2012. And I also wanted to point out that we had 2 staff that were recognized by the State Sheriff's Association at the annual awards banquet in December. 2 of our staff received the Distinguished Service Award from the State Sheriff's Association, which recognizes a person who in the performance of their duties performs an act of outstanding or especially meritorious service while demonstrating selflessness and devotion to duty. And so these 2 individuals were nominated by us, the command staff at the Sheriff's Office, to the Oregon State Sheriff's Association, and they were selected by the Enforcement Command Council. That would be Detective Sergeant Todd Whitlow and Detective Carson Bartlett, who were recognized for their tremendous work on illegal marijuana market enforcement in the county. We had back-to-back record-breaking seizures of illegal marijuana during the summer. And so they were recognized at the state level for their work. We last week held our annual in-service training session for all of our staff. That includes corrections, enforcement, and support services. So everyone in the office was in attendance. Sheriff Swenson and I both split duties as far as presentations, and we spent 2 hours on ethics and talking about things that are trends within the career and ways that we can mitigate the known risks of shift work and sleep deprivation and the health issues that come from those things, and how to make good choices. And so I actually am going to speak to 2 more staff this afternoon that were not present. They had excused absences, so to speak. So I'll be giving that presentation to them this afternoon, just to make sure that we cover that with all of our staff. So I just want to say thank you again to Ken and to the board for all of your support as we embark on this journey together. I look forward to working with all of you and bringing the sheriff's office along as we do great things here in Yamhill County.
Thank you, Sheriff. You've certainly had significant challenges presented to you already, before being sworn in today. But based on your brief presentation, it's clear that you are already tackling some of those issues and ready to hit the ground running on day one. So,
Thank you.
I think that certain people are placed in positions of leadership at the right time, at the time they're needed. And I have full faith and confidence that you are going to be a terrific sheriff for this county.
Thank you.
Congratulations.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, we couldn't have handpicked a more worthy and qualified individual, and we're really grateful that you're willing to step up and serve. And you are well respected in this community, and it's been apparent. So thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
You've got a busy day ahead.
I do.
Thank you, Sheriff.
Thanks.
Okay, item E is department updates. There's nothing today for item E. Item F is our work session, and today we have a review and discussion of the 2024-25 discretionary allocation. And Mr. Huffer is going to give us a presentation, so to speak, on those next items.
So I've got some handouts, so maybe it's easier if I come on.
Yeah, we don't receive anything over a half-inch thick.
Or with lots of numbers.
Yeah.
I'm gonna go over this line by line.
He did warn us that this was going to be a long meeting.
Okay. So the board is familiar with this process. This is the first step of kicking off the, our budget work for adopting next fiscal year's budget. We start this process very early, and the first discussion is around discretionary allocation. And so in preparation for today's meeting, I did put together a memorandum that's on the cover here to kind of talk about what I'm hoping to go through. And just a reminder, this isn't everything that we're going to talk about today, and depending on consensus or action that the board takes on the discretionary allocation, it's not set in stone. This is a starting point of when we set the discretionary or general fund allocation to departments. This sets the baseline where we start building budgets. And then as we go through the budget process and actually start, because it's really hard at this point because we're at mid-year through the fiscal year. So projecting things like ending balances and where we're going to be at with spending, we're doing a lot of that work. But again, we're at mid-year and it's really hard and challenging to project to the end of the year. And so when we actually start building budgets and start getting into it, that's when we start identifying needs, where there may be shortages on, as far as resources being available, organizational changes, all those things that are all factored in that we're going to spend the next 6 months talking about. A lot of this is in preparation for budget committee meetings, which are scheduled to be in the first week in May, but our team, the budget team and department heads, we're going to be, after I issue budget instructions, which are also attached in this packet, a draft version for you to look at. Once I issue those budget instructions out to department heads, then we'll start looking at, we're going to be working almost nonstop on budget and getting things ready so we can continue to operate come July 1. This is probably, I'll just highlight again, and I say this every time I do my budget presentation, this is one of the most important functions that you do as the board as far as the budget adoption, because if we don't have an adopted budget on July 1, we can't deliver services. We can't work. So this is a real critical function, and I'll just go ahead and jump right into this unless there's questions right out of the gate. So again, so you have a memorandum that's attached here. The first attachment I'd refer you to is it's going to be on page 3. It's going to look like a table, and this is a projection of a very preliminary high-level projection for 10002, which is the fund where we record all of our property taxes and lesser taxes received. Again, we're still mid-year. We have collection is still underway. We also distribution from all the other lesser taxes, the alcohol, tobacco, marijuana, amusement tax, some of those things, the distribution can vary. So it's really hard at times to project that, but it looks like for the most part, we're projecting everything to come in on par or close to what was budgeted. So that's what this is. And then what you'll see on the very last column is what I have done tentatively projecting what next year's discretionary will look like and what we're going to budget for. We do work with the assessor on pulling data for this year and last year to then put together a projection on what revenues are going to look like for next year. And we feel pretty confident that based on the data that they provided, and we put a conservative number, but we're anticipating about a 3% increase, 3 to 4% increase in discretionary revenues if you total up everything else. We also, numbers have been looking really good, and I know this is subject to the economy, but the treasurer's been doing a great job with our investments, and then also the interest rates that we're getting for the pool is looking really good. So those projections are also helping this fund, where the revenues are coming in much better than what we've seen in previous years. So again, these are very conservative numbers that I've put in here on what the revenues are going to look like, because things like the hardest one to predict is the marijuana tax revenue, because when it first rolled out, we were getting some pretty large numbers that were coming out, but then there was some legislative changes where those funds were being diverted elsewhere. And so the county's shares of that marijuana revenue dropped pretty significantly. And we're still waiting to see how this is going to play out on what our annual allocation is really going to look like. We only have about 5 years of history with that. So it still proves to be a little bit challenging for us to project. So you're going to see a pretty conservative number in here where you're going to see right around 85,000. I'm trending it down a little bit. Just it's what our year-to-dates are looking like. And knowing that there's a short session coming up, I don't know if they're going to do any other legislative changes where the counties may see more funds coming out of that.
So did HHS end up seeing the cut from what we were normally getting from the marijuana tax? Did HHS end up getting that through Measure 110 or not?
I believe so. There has been, I'm not 100% sure. That might be a question for Lindsay. I can follow up but on what the year to dates, but it was, Measure 110 was supposed to send treatment funds directly to HHS. And I know there was some delays at OHA releasing those funds, but I'm not up to speed 100%.
I was just more curious of how bad it was once they did steal the funding from the marijuana tax that we now don't get, if it most likely probably didn't come back in full through HHS, but I'm curious what that discrepancy is going to be.
Yeah, and I'll have that noted to talk to Lindsay about that. And then the main point for our discussion today on the next page, and which is a nice big, I did it 11 by 17, so it's a little bit easier to read. is what we call Table 1, which is the fiscal year 25 discretionary allocation table. And so there's a couple moving pieces here. When you look at the columns, the first column, you're going to see the breakdown, which is the departments, which is split up by teams. And so you'll see the budget teams, how that's consolidated. The next column, the 23-24, that is what was approved last year and what has been allocated out to departments as far as their share of discretionary funds. And you'll see some of the percentages on how that relates or breaks down for the total allocation. The third column, which is called the initial allocation 24-25, for this column is where I go into it and I back out any one-time requests. There's been times in the past that the board and budget committee may have approved a $500,000 for a project of the general fund, and that was only intended to be a one-time funding. And so in this column is typically where I'll make those adjustments to the initial allocation by backing out any one-time allocations. Now, the fourth column is, and the fourth, fifth, and sixth is the next thing that having a discussion about. So what I'm recommending, what you'll see here is I'm recommending a 4.5% increase to discretionary allocations for most departments. And I caveat that it's for most departments. And when I come up with this number, I'm looking at a couple different things. One, we know we have an increase in personnel expenses that all general fund departments are going to have to deal with, both currently this fiscal year and next fiscal year with the adoption of in particular, the AFSCME CBA that we just reached agreement on and went into effect this year. We also have agreements with detention workers, with FOPO, with DDAs that are also in place, and we're going into negotiations with Teamsters again this spring. But there was some extending the provisions and some cost increases that were already factored in this current fiscal year. So what you're going to see is under the initial allocation adjustment, you're going to see what that 4.5% equates to with that increase. And the other part, I'm sorry, I'm jumped ahead. I realized there's two parts. There's the personnel costs, the increased costs that we're seeing. The second aspect that I look at with coming up with the recommended number is I'm also trying to do projections. I'll do projections out on 1002 out at least 5 years and look at what this impact's going to do, whether or not it's sustainable or not. And so with the 4.5% and what I have proposed here, I feel comfortable with this recommendation, even though I still think that there's going to be some work to be done probably by next year and the year after that with some, depending on what revenues are going to look like. But I still feel comfortable that the general fund can handle this 4.5% with the changes that I have proposed, and that we'll be able to, it's not going to fully deplete the general fund or put us into a bad position come when we start talking about fiscal year 26. That being said, when you look at the next column, you're going to see that I made an additional adjustment, and most of those are going to be negative numbers. What I'm recommending is not doing a 4.5% increase across the board, but doing an additional, I'm proposing an adjustment to where, because again, I'm trying to protect those resources. I can only slice a pie up so many ways when it comes to these discretionary funds, is being able to back out that some of these departments I don't think need the full allocation. In looking at, we just finished running a report that looked at a comparison between budgeted beginning balances and audited beginning balances, and most of the departments that you see here actually ended up with more funds or more cost savings last fiscal year than what was projected. So their beginning balances are a little bit higher than what was budgeted. So I think being able to utilize some of that balances, the savings that they had that they didn't project for should be able to make up the difference for this reduction in the discretionary allocation. The second part that I'm looking at is also knowing that some of these departments have also been working, either have obtained additional resources or, you know, like juvenile detention in particular, they've been working very actively in updating their bed rental agreements and trying to work on those revenue resources. So that's one example. So there may be additional resources coming in to offset this, to again, try to protect what limited general funds we have available to kind of support the priorities that the board wants to make. You're also going to see in particular the one, and I'm still trying to get into the details, like for HHS in particular, you're going to see a reduction there. I anticipate that, you know, we're still trying to get into the details, and I'm planning to have pretty extensive discussion during this budget season about the opioid settlement funds. To date, we haven't spent any of those funds. And now that we're getting a clearer picture of what we're looking at as far as balances in that fund, and then I'm working with county counsel's office to again kind of dive in around the restrictions and what the limitations are. So I do think one of the easiest ones is I do think that a reduction to HHS could be supplemented for we could backfill with opioid settlement funds, because that one, I know that's an eligible program area because it's for prevention and treatment. Correct. Whereas, you know, I couldn't use those funds to backfill admin as an example. I couldn't do that. I picked an easy one. Some of them that I know the board's going to have questions about is because knowing the funding situation with the sheriff's office is what, or if any of those funds can be used for any type of law enforcement or corrections. I think that's where we still have questions, and that's where we have to pour into, you know, really dive into the settlement agreements and see, you know, all the restrictions and whether or not that's allowable use. It might be able to fund certain program elements or certain areas, but we can't just use it for a replacement for general operations. But I'm kind of tabling that because I know that's going to be more of an in-depth discussion, and I haven't shared, you know, once we get into the opioid fund discussion a little bit later this year, I'll be able to present numbers, what the balances are, what we have available, and those limitations. So again, that's one where I was looking at HHS in particular, if, you know, because these discretionary funds are split over several divisions and programs in HHS that we have coming in. And so, you know, it could be that instead of this, you know, we could use opioid funds to backfill, but subject to later discussions.
Christian, when we have that budget discussion on those funds, can we also have a discussion sort of first off that covers the restrictions so that we understand fully? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's, yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Clearly spelled out in the southern place.
Okay.
And other counties have started to roll out and start spending more money about some real world examples.
Okay.
Right.
But
Nice.
it's primarily targeted at remediation.
Okay.
Who monitors that?
So there is some reporting that we're required
Yep.
to provide back to the National Settlement Administrator.
Mm.
So they do track that. I don't know how closely they track that. It has been made very clear throughout the process that there are specific uses for these funds and what they will be, what enforcement would ever look like.
And it's kind of twofold because we'll have the reporting, but then we also have our own audit that we do on an annual basis, which also looks at specific things like that on, you know, when we have restricted funds, are we using those restricted funds for their intended use? And so we have reporting requirements. I think Mike Barnhart did our first report to that settlement because we haven't spent any funds out of that to date. So it was a simple report. But then the second part, it would be one of those that we would have our auditors also looking at and providing input and making reports on that as part of our annual financial audit.
So at this point, Christian, do you have any examples of what other counties have done?
I can certainly provide you with those. I don't have,
Okay,
folks are starting to do it.
okay.
Yeah, certainly have that ready, when we schedule the discussion, but curious.
No, that's fine. I just want, yeah, I'd be
Yeah.
interested to know what everybody else is doing. Thank you.
So what you're seeing here, as far as my recommendation in totals, the 4.5% represents a $1.3 million increase to discretionary allocations as compared to the current fiscal year, with an adjustment where we're reducing that to the individual departments by 189,000 to retain that in 1002. That, again, I'm trying to keep some funds available for further discussion when we get into the budget process. And that's where I'll point back to the first table that we went over. That leaves us a balance of $1.3 million in 1002 as an operational reserve. And this is the one that I know every time we go through the budget process, I know some of the budget committee members give me a bad time because, and I think even some of the board, when that number starts getting low or under $1 million, I start getting really nervous because again, we need that operational reserve in the general fund, and I'm going to need that reserve in order to build the budget for next year. And so that's what this recommended allocation does. And I do realize that, again, this is a baseline allocation where departments would start building their budgets with these numbers in their budget. And I recognize this isn't going to cover the full amount of the CBA impacts or the personnel costs that are coming across. As an example, for this current year, we saw a 7% increase for ASME, and next year will be a 3% increase plus an additional market study that's going to be done, and we'll have to, if there's any adjustments to be made. So I know departments are going to have a challenging time with this discretionary allocation. But again, this discretionary allocation is not intended to cover all of the various increases. We have to look at what other resources we have available, where we can apply cost savings. We have to start building that budget because, again, the general fund is limited. And I feel comfortable with this recommendation as a starting point. And I do believe that we do have some other resources to talk about, like I mentioned before, the opioid settlement funds, where we can use those, which could result in further adjustments depending on what we do with those funds. That if we identify that the board wants to move even more of those funds, depending on the balance, because again, I also want to be careful because we're still, how we're receiving funds in opioid settlement funds is kind of like some of the other ones. We don't have I can't tell you that each year we're going to receive this amount because they've been coming in from different settlements, different payment schedules. Some have been paying a little bit ahead. So that's why I want to avoid kind of getting into too much of the opioid settlement discussion. But, as an example, if we start using that and we identify, let's say, another $40,000 that you could reduce the allocation further here for like HHS to utilize those funds, you have that available and it's there for discussion when we get before the budget committee. The other fund that I would point to is we also have that $2.5 million PERS retirement reserve that we have in Fund 80. That's another one that we could have a discussion as well about, because again, it was budgeted years ago. And it was for unanticipated, PERS increases that we've been seeing, and we've been seeing steady increases when it comes to PERS. So that might be another resource as well that we may need to get into. I just get really concerned if we start dipping too far into reserves. Because once we start spending down reserves, just like any other savings account, once you spend it and it's depleted and you don't have any further funds going back into it, it's not sustainable. So we're very deliberate in when we start getting into those and spending those, because it might give us a 1-year fix, but if we spend it all, what are we going to do in year 2, year 3, year 4?
Are we allowed to sort of backfill that PERS fund? In other words, let's say we were to look at significant savings or a deliberate savings to shore that up.
We could, because we haven't done contributions to that in quite some time. At this point, we've used that for some interfund loans. And so it has grown just a little bit, because even though it's an interfund loan, we still have to charge interest on that loan. And so we've been getting the interest payments that have been coming in addition to the principal into that. And then we also earn with it sitting in the pool as well. So like one strategy would be maybe target some of those interest earnings or something like that. You could do a distribution out of there that doesn't spend down the principal, but it takes advantage of whatever earnings that we've had on that fund, and you could put, backfill that way. I'm kind of going the other direction, but again, I just wanted to flag that I do think that during this upcoming budget season, we should probably talk about some of those funds, because with this baseline amount, and once departments start sharpening their pencils and start building their budgets, if they're finding that the personnel costs and the material costs and everything associated with that, if they're having to apply cost savings measures that could result in changing or reducing services or operations, that the board and the budget committee have the necessary funds available to consider where to prioritize, where to direct these funds. And you'll see that some of like the sheriff's office in particular, we know the challenges there. It's the full 4.5%. Another department that it struggles from time to time, the assessor's office, is getting the full 4.5%. Some of those are really challenging because, like, Derek in particular doesn't have a very diverse revenue portfolio. It's mainly general fund. Most of his costs are driven by personnel expenses. And so he's one that'll have, some challenges coming forward. So
Does this include paybacks for who we stole from last year? I mean, one that comes to mind was Christian's ending fund. Does that get him back to where he was?
yeah, I did. That was fixed.
Okay.
Well, Kit's not gonna like the parks number.
Yeah,
Parks and negotiations are still at hand on that.
Parks is another one, because again, I get it, it's $3,000 to kind of back out of that allocation, but again, I was trying to come up with a methodology, because one of my biggest missions, and I will say that when I came into this position in 2019, was to tear down silos between departments and make sure that we're all working well together. The biggest thing that creates silos or gets competitive is when you're talking about cutting up the general fund, and then it gets competitive. And much in the same way with some of the reactions that I received last year and you received last year when we were taking savings from other departments to move it to the sheriff's office, it presents challenges. But again, I do want to recognize, not a fan of silos, but this also represents a prioritization of services as well, and how we sustain that. And sometimes it's not fair. We have to make some cuts in some areas to make sure that we're able to continue to operate into the future. So, and then I'll just say it again, this is not set in stone. This is a starting point, and we still have 6 months of discussions, projections, and a lot of work to do before we get to the finish line in June to adopt a budget. And then the last attachment that I have in the packet, and you're going to be used to seeing this, it's a draft of the budget instructions that reflects if the board approves the discretionary allocation in table 1. This packet of budget instructions is what we would issue out to departments on I believe we're scheduled for the second Tuesday in January, to provide those instructions to where I unleash departments to start building their budgets, and we start doing roll up our sleeves when we get to work on the budget. There's several weeks of doing that, and it includes the budget calendar that's attached, all of the internal charges, which we've really been working to hold those charges flat. In some cases, we made some reductions to also get some savings out there, but also recognizing that we still have to collect funds for paying for insurance, keeping the lights on, facility improvements, all the fuel, all those things that are in here. So yeah, so I think that's it. No, as far as the packet, and see if there's any questions.
I think this is a good starting point. I mean, obviously, if we start to hear from Sheriff Elliott that, you know, this is grossly insufficient to cover whatever they need covered, then we're going to have some discussions and wiggle room and adjustments made, I think. But I think in terms of the prioritization of the percent change, I think that you're in line with what we've at least discussed are our priorities in the past. So. And I think we talked about this a couple of days ago, but the change in district attorney seems significant, but that's also factors in the ending balance.
Yeah, I haven't gone into the details, but the district attorney's office is one that had a pretty high, higher than anticipated beginning balance. So, but again, I haven't done a ton of in-depth analysis into where that number came from, but I do think that based on those numbers, you know, I feel comfortable about doing a little bit of a reduction, and then Brad, once his budget team digs in, and if they find, well, here's the issue that I have and the result of the savings, that would be a discussion that he could bring an add back request to the budget committee.
Okay.
And I'd say that for everyone who's on this list that has a reduction. I do think, you know, I want to be careful. I mean, the nice part is we don't do zero balance as far as an expectation that all departments have to spend to zero. Because again, I think that encourages
Wasteful spending.
spending.
Yeah.
At the same time, I do think it's twofold. One, we can address this with general fund, but I do think departments need to sharpen their pencils, and they need to look at where we can find cost savings and make sure that we're prioritizing what we're spending our resources on. Because again, you know, I'll say it again, the general fund is not an infinite amount. It's limited. And I don't have the numbers in front of me, but it only represents a small portion of our total revenue resource. But $32 million gets split up pretty quickly, and criminal justice gets 70% of that, and the sheriff's office gets 50% of the total general fund right now. And so that's where it gets difficult, where with those needs, and hopefully with the, again, like I've worked with Tim in prior years, and I'm looking forward to working with Sam moving forward. But there are going to be some challenges with the sheriff's office budget, and that's why I had the full allocation. So, and hopefully we can find some cost savings or some additional revenue resources that could come in to help offset those needs.
Yeah, I think these are good goals. It's hard to tell at this point because we don't know
Mhm.
where they're at expense wise and how that translates into operations. But you have to start somewhere. So
Correct.
I think this is a good kicking off point.
And also, I think the message to every department, including our own, is that we really need to get a scalpel out, not sharpen pencils, but really start looking at, okay, what are our priorities in this county? And what are the expenses that we can not justify? But I know that for me, law enforcement is a priority. And I think unfortunately, we're seeing that more and more. We're asking our sheriff's office staff to do sometimes the unimaginable, and they need to be given every single benefit that we can provide for them. So that's going to be my eye towards this budget. Unfortunately, that's the world we live in.
How did dog control end up with 190 grand? I thought that was,
Dog control. What are you looking at?
the ending balance. Or is that only because we're halfway through the year and that's why there's an ending?
Well, just a reminder, that's the audited
Mhm.
ending balance for last fiscal year.
Yeah,
Got it. Okay.
because I thought we spent that down to 0. Or will?
It depends. I don't have the numbers in front of me.
Yeah.
It's just when you're looking at those beginning balance tables, that's the audited beginning balance. So that means if it was budgeted at 0, I'm looking at it right now. Actually, we had it budgeted for the beginning of this fiscal year at 151,000, and the audited beginning balance was 190,000.
Okay.
In dog control. And again, that's for what wasn't spent last year. And
Okay.
so we give the audited beginning balances to department heads because again, that contributes to their starting point when they're projecting their year end for this year.
Hmm.
They can't, unless they can't spend the difference this current fiscal year because it hasn't been appropriated. So any additional savings that they didn't anticipate or budget for can't be spent this fiscal year if they don't have the appropriation authority.
But that makes it look promising going into next year, right, or not?
No, I think dog control is going to require some further discussions.
All right.
In fact, I would say there will probably be budget discussions, but probably work sessions
Okay.
to kind of talk about the long-term plans and the sustainability of that program.
Okay.
Another one for the new sheriff.
Yep. Yeah, because Marine Patrol will be another one that we'll have to
Yep.
have a discussion about.
That's
also.
another one. And for that one, I didn't apply any discretionary as part of this recommendation. We still have funds
Yes,
coming
thought
from
it was at
economic
0.
development going in there. You know, that's another one that when we get down the budget process, if there's a request to apply some discretionary, depending on, once we see how the whole thing, the total budget, once you start seeing all the general fund departments and start seeing all the various add back requests, then you can start having that discussion about applying any of this discretionary funds to Marine.
Are you needing us to vote on the initial?
Yeah, I think in the
Allocation.
past, or at least we've started since I've been here, that the board has actually made a motion to approve the county administrator's recommended discretionary allocation. And approve the budget instructions if the board is ready to do so.
The only thing that I had mentioned prior to today is I would love to have a breakdown of Health and Human Services, and because so much of that funding is a pass-through from the state, So I would love to see as part of that, 2.2 million or and some change, what percentage goes to veteran services? What percentage is technically a match by the county for grant funding?
Right.
What percentage is, maybe other programs that we fund outside of the state? It'd be nice to see a breakdown of that so that.
Yeah.
Okay,
And so I have that information. I'd be happy to share that. This is what Lindsay and her team prepared last year.
Okay.
And it was presented as part of her budget presentation. As far as the numbers, because again, I pulled this from last year's budget, so I don't know if this has been updated to reflect. I think this is budgeted numbers, but
okay.
I do have that information that
Okay.
I can provide.
Yeah, that would be great. Any other questions, commissioners? Okay, so I'm moving to move approval of the initial fiscal year 24-25 discretionary allocations. Right,
If it helps.
as presented.
And
Because it's a consideration of setting initial FY25 discretionary allocation for departments and FY25 budget instructions. I'm just reading off the subject on the memo.
Okay,
If that'll help.
okay,
Yeah.
so moved. Any further discussion?
Done.
All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Aye. All opposed, same sign. Great, thank you. Motion passes.
I don't know how hard it'd be, but another interesting number that I'd like to see when we kind of get going here is with the ASME approval and the 7% in the first year, how much of this 4% that we're going up, if that wasn't there, would this actually be an ask of reduction like we did last year, like a 2% reduction in budgets? I know it's kind of like broad level.
Yeah. Yes and no. I do think with my recommendation, I mean, it was a driver in my recommendation, but I think it's across the board. I think we did do a 2% reduction last year.
Right.
And then funded individual requests here.
I'm just thinking,
Yeah.
I mean, we have huge cost for employment. And if we go up 7% on employment and we only go up 4% for on an average, allocations over
Right.
some departments, is that really still a cut? You know what I mean? Is
It
it
is.
still like a 2% cut?
It is for
In
some
reality.
departments and that's where it's hard because when you look at the list of all the departments that get general funds, it's going to vary. An office, like I said, like Derek's office in particular, that
Mhm.
doesn't have a lot of additional, he relies on general fund as a majority. That does have an impact. You look at other departments that maybe, the clerk's office as an example, which the general fund allocation compared to the other revenues that Carrie has coming into that office, this is much smaller as far as what that impact is. So, and again, it's not perfect. It's how we always do this discretionary, but I'd be happy to pull some of those numbers. I don't have a lot of because of the timing of when the contracts were approved and the time that it's taken payroll to process the
Yeah.
retros and everything else, we just started recording the full impact of this, to our general
It's
ledgers.
nothing I need,
all
right?
those numbers.
As we progress with this towards May, I think it'd just be an interesting number to have. And just, if, just for myself,
Mhm.
to be like, we're not just willy-nilly,
Yeah.
hey, everybody, it's a 4% increase, have fun
No.
with it. It's actually still a cut because we're trying to cover,
Correct.
contracts.
Correct. And and that is
Build that perception.
that is one of the slides in my budget presentation that I have that gets into the specifics about the cost breakdown of what we're currently seeing. both the current year and what's being projected or built into next year's budget. And so I will have that information when I present my budget.
Okay.
My budget message.
All right. Anything further on this topic? No?
Sure, I'm gonna take a 2-minute break.
Sure. We will take a break and come back at 11 o'clock. Thank you. Okay, so we are back from our break. It's 11:02. And we're picking up at the consent agenda. Do I have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So
Okay,
moved.
any further discussion?
None.
All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 All opposed, same sign. Great, thank you. Item H, old business. H1 is consideration of approval of a board order and findings in the matter of upholding the planning director's decision to approve planning docket P-03-23, partition approval for tax lot number 6304-00307. The applicants are Richard and Nicole Moore, and this was continued from November 30th of 2023. And this is the approval of the findings. I will move approval. Is there further discussion?
None.
None.
All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Aye. All opposed, same sign. Great, thank you. Motion passes. H2, review and discussion of childcare recommendations. This is continued from December 14th of 2023. And we have our Economic Development Director, Joya Goodrim, who has joined us today. Welcome, welcome. Good to see you.
Morning.
Good morning. Good to see you all. Thank you.
Yeah, so last time we went into a rather in-depth discussion about the details of what your group has put forward or researched along with Commissioner Starrett over the past month or so. And we had a couple questions about the recommendations, specifically about how Newburgh, the city of Newburgh would handle SDC fees if a project was to be prolonged or take a few years to come to fruition.
Correct. I did have a conversation with Mayor Rossacker
For a second.
in Newburgh. And what he said to me was that currently there is no sunset. They did not anticipate a sunset, and it would take the council updating and making that change on their own. The other thing is George Fox is a tax exempt organization, so they may not even be required to pay any tax on that, whether it's STC or other.
Okay,
So I don't foresee that being an issue.
Okay.
Moving forward.
Okay. Thank you.
okay, appreciate that follow-up.
I was assured of that.
Thank you.
Okay, so just to recap, we have the same recommendation on the floor, which is, I believe, a total of 2.13 million. $760,386 would go to Chemeketa Community College for what is essentially a 14-week training program. To have about 25 students or student cohorts each year for 3 years, run through that program and be able to get them into fast-tracked into the workforce, which is one of the most significant needs at this point.
Correct.
There was part of the recommendation is $1 million for George Fox University in partnership, I suppose, with ADEC to plan and design a training, research, and childcare facility, actual facility on the university campus. And as we discussed, that would be hopefully met with a pretty significant what's the term, fundraising appeal by not only ADEC, but also the university and the philanthropy groups that they work with. What am I thinking? The university
Endowment.
endowment. Yes.
I don't know where they're planning on the funding coming from, but they've been working on this for 2 years now. So I have no doubt that they will make it happen. So yes.
And we have heard anecdotally that they have had some significant commitments in terms of future funding. So it might not be hard and fast or money in hand, but they have had some significant commitments from other partners in the community.
But in terms of our need to have this money expended by a certain time period.
Oh,
This
yes.
is absolutely doable in terms of planning and design, and it's something they can take then.
Correct.
to
They
say.
expect to have this completed by the end of 2025, so 2 years from now. And the deadline is to have it expended by December of 2026.
Okay.
Okay. Oh,
Okay, and then the 369,614 for Northwest Christian Church to expand their after-school program called The Zone to 4 additional schools in Yamhill County, potentially more. I know we talked about getting into some of the rural schools. But really a program that is already boxed up and ready to go. It just needs some money for expansion.
Correct.
Are there any questions about the recommendations? We went over these in depth last time, but any follow-up
No,
questions?
just same concern what you just addressed, and I don't want it to become like this boilerplate. Yep, we just work with the large cities, Newburgh, McMinnville. I want there to be an effort to reach out to the rural and make sure that they know this program is there. Now, whether they from there, don't want to engage with it, that's fine. I just want to make sure we make a concerted effort to reach out to our rural schools for sure, especially because the zone program, what I really love about that is the integration of the literacy program that for our rural schools. I mean, all of our schools really need that, but our rural schools are hurting on
Right.
literacy right now. So,
And that was a grant, a specific grant that they didn't know how to implement it. So the zone was the vehicle. So really the funding has to come from the state for that. So hopefully they'll get more of those literacy grants in the smaller schools. And then the zone would be, again, the vehicle.
Mhm.
I like it.
Okay. Anything to add? I know I just kind of did a,
No, I've been meeting with providers and talking to them. They're very excited about having an opportunity to provide the internship opportunities, the practicums for those students. And I have not talked to any of the schools yet, but I will make an effort to contact the rural school districts to see if the zone program would be of interest to them. I'm happy to do that.
okay. Well, I think commissioners, we've had a very, very lengthy discussion about this money. And from the beginning, we were really looking for the biggest bang for our buck because it's not a huge sum of money when you're talking about setting up new programs or setting up a facility. I do feel like this recommendation as a whole is a great sort of it encompasses all of the need. That's what I like about it. And it does so with very low overhead in terms of what these programs cost to actually put on. And we knew that we really weren't going to be able to build a facility for $2 million and do all of the things necessary to have that, have the program rolled into that. So being able to leverage the, frankly, deep pockets of folks who are connected to George Fox and love that school and care about the future of that school and those students, as well as ADEC, a fantastic employer in our county. I think it's a win-win. I think we have found a solution that leverages existing resources and will increase access and capacity for childcare. So
And-
I'm very excited about this.
Yeah, and the
Thank you. Thank you.
longevity, the foundation that this is building for the, next 15, 20, 50 years is phenomenal.
Agreed. Chair, I would move approval of the childcare recommendations.
Okay. Commissioner Sterrett moves approval. Any further discussion or questions?
None.
I just want to say thank you for your time and effort that you've devoted over the past couple of months now, actually, to meet with the stakeholders and sort of hash out new ideas. It was like new ideas were coming and coming all the time. Every time you turned around, there was a new idea. So I just want to thank you for the time that you've put in and partnership with Joya as well. And Joya, we kind of dumped this on you
Okay.
in short order and you rose to the challenge for sure. And then some. So we appreciate your work as well.
It's my pleasure. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Very thorough and very much appreciate how detailed you were
Thank
in,
you.
you left no stone unturned.
Well, I did my best. Thank you so
So,
much. I
thank you.
appreciate this. Thank you so much. And we'll move on.
Yeah.
And on to the next thing.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So then basically the contracts will
We got to
go.
vote first.
Oh,
Yep.
sorry.
Sorry.
Okay. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed, same sign. Great. Thank you. Motion
That's a
passes.
really important part.
Yes.
Thank you. And I'll work with Christian
Okay.
and the organizations to move forward. Thank you very
Jen.
much.
Thank you. So
Did you have a
the,
question?
a question about the contracts will, so these will then come to you or they go to you regarding you said there's kind of like basically a template for
Right.
ARPA funds.
We have a template contract that we've been using.
For grants, yeah, if that's.
Yeah,
how these will
we
be
have a
structured, same
template
thing.
for the cover, but there's still going to be required work on
Mhm.
the exhibits
Scope
and
of work.
the scope of work. You know, we have a generalized contract that we've been using, but again, we have to attach because each of these projects have their own individualized scope of work. So getting those signatures and getting the contracts put together, and then we'll bring those back before the board. Either as they come in or hopefully as a group, if we get all three agreements ready to go, we can bring those back
Mhm.
probably in January.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you.
All right, wonderful. Let's see. We are now on to item I, other business. I1 is consideration of approval of reinstatement and amendment number 1 for intergovernmental agreement number 15695 between Yamhill County Community Justice Juvenile Division and the Oregon Department of Education Youth Development Division, increasing the award amount from $133,200 to $266,496, and updating the agreement terms to July 1st of 2021 through June 30th of 2025. I will move approval. Are there any further questions or discussion?
None.
Is it just a coincidence that it's exactly double plus $96 or?
Mhm.
That's it. That's all I had.
Well, it was adjusting the total amount. Are you?
It's like
Do
somebody
you
threw
want me to re-
$96 in there so they wouldn't look like it was just double.
Totally double.
Oh, well, I think it should be.
I'm sorry.
I don't know if it should
I'll
be
stop-
double, but
I'll
it's-
stop wasting time.
Did anybody move approval? Did I?
You did.
Okay.
It's been a long day.
Okay. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed, same sign. Great, thank you. Item I2, consideration of approval of agreement number 146472-1 between Yamhill County Health and Human Services and the Oregon Department of Human Services, Oregon Health Authority for access to, I think it's pronounced MOTS,
Mhm.
/ roads reporting. And then the Oracle number. Do I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Any discussion, questions?
None.
None.
All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Aye. All opposed, same sign. Motion passes. Thank you. I3 is consideration of approval of amendment number 1 to the local mental health authority, local public health authority, and coordinated care organization agreement between Yamhill County and Yamhill County Care Organization, Board Order 23-04, updating data, reporting language, increasing funding from $350,140.05 per year to $360,644.25 per year, and extending the terms of agreement through December 31st of 2024, subject to final review and approval of County Council's office. This particular amendment does include the needle exchange program, if you saw that in the packet.
Mhm.
I believe that program is just over $100,000 a year. I would love to get an update on the status of that program. I know that we are not directly funding it necessarily anymore, but we do have to review and sign off on this contract. And I've had some complaints come from people who live in the city of McMinnville that the needle exchange van is being used or parked or facilitated in parks where young children are going to soccer practice and other things, so that's visible to young children. And obviously that's, a concern for parents. So I would love to get an update on the status of the program and, how they are mitigating some of those concerns, because I share that concern.
We have with us our HHS Director, Lindsay Manfred, I believe. I'd had this discussion as I do every time this contract comes before us. I've had some in-depth conversations about this program. Back when it was first presented, I had concerns about it. It is no longer being funded by the county, by HHS, but it is being funded by the CCO. But you're right, we do have to sign off. I have a different set of questions regarding the data, and I've asked the director on a number of occasions for what is the data that shows that this is actually something other than, picking up needles or giving out needles. And I know Director Manfred and I have had that conversation, so I will defer to her on that. But again, every time this comes around, it's sort of like, it's the whole ideological component of harm reduction. Are we enabling addicts, or are we mitigating the damage done by addiction? And there is a fine line. So again, I have my concerns, but I know that Director Manfred and I have pretty much, we hash this out every year. So anyhow, I will stop there.
Welcome, Director Manfred. And I don't mean to put you on the spot. I just, I was almost thinking of it in terms of if we could come back with an update on the program itself, because in addition to what Commissioner Sterrett just described, I think the community has a growing sense of concern around how it's being applied, especially through the city of McMinnville. We're finding more and more needles and things on the streets and near schools. And so I know that Provoking Hope has been very responsive in the past when there's been complaints come in about, the van being parked on a bus route. So kids are getting off the bus and walking past it. They've been very responsive. It seems like maybe that's not the case recently. So I just want to make sure that we're covering all those bases.
Yeah, so I would start.
Hang on just a second. We can't hear you.
Okay.
Oh, there we go.
Okay now? Can you hear me? Okay, great. Thank you. So I would really encourage anyone who has concerns about the program to either connect with Provoking Hope themselves if they are concerned about a location that something has been. And if there's not response from them, they can absolutely reach out to me. I've not received any complaints or concerns that have come to me or anyone within HHS that I'm aware of. So I would be happy to follow up with anyone. I do know in terms of, I heard mention around parks and things like that. Part of the reason I think that they are spending time in areas like Marsh Lane and things of that nature, even though they are close to parks, is because that's where we're seeing a huge hub of people congregating. And so they're going there, they're making sweeps, they're trying to keep those parks free of needles. And it doesn't necessarily mean that that is always where exchanges are happening. And in fact, previous data has showed, and I want to make sure that I confirm this because we're working on the final data pieces for the 2023 report, which I can get to you as soon as that's complete. But a lot of the data was showing that when they are out and about in the community, a lot of what's happening is sweeps and cleaning up needles in parks that are not associated with the exchange process and people. And a lot of the actual exchanging is happening on site at Provoking Hope. So that has historically been a lot of what our data has showed. And I want to confirm that that's true and accurate from the latest 2023 data that I can absolutely get to you. We're working on compiling it. We're not quite done with the calendar year, but we'll have that report ready in early January after we finalize the last couple of weeks of data, make sure that we have it all in place and get the CCO data that we also collect that looks at things like sepsis and endocarditis and other things that we know are really costly, expensive things that happen that send people to emergency departments, sometimes to ICUs when they are using needles that are, have bacteria and things of those nature. We'll say too, I know that there is an increase in funding for the syringe exchange program this year. That is largely funds that came to us as an amendment over the course of this last year with the contract with the CCO that is funding a small portion of a nurse's time, that nurses working through public health, and she's been going out weekly on the exchange van with Provoking Hope to support people with wound care. We've been seeing an increase in the number of pretty concerning wounds. Largely, we think it's related to drugs being laced with tranq, and we know that tranq it really just sort of eats away at the skin, and so we're seeing a lot more of that, and we're trying to get ahead of that before those folks end up in some really really debilitating situations where they are potentially talking about amputation, things like that, which of course we know in addition to the pain and suffering that individual is experiencing, we know that those things are incredibly costly. And so when we're looking at, say, a case of someone in the ICU with something like that, or something like endocarditis because of use of an exchange, or excuse me, a needle that has the bacteria, it really does pencil out. And we have seen over time with some, I will say, increases during, I think it was 2021, there's lots of reasons we can guess about that. But historically, from the time that we started the syringe exchange program in 2019, and each year we saw decreases in those types of hospital activity, which was reassuring both from a numbers standpoint of individuals, but also from a cost standpoint, which is of course something the CCO is looking at as they are supporting the funding for this. So I would be happy to bring more specific data back after the new year once we complete this latest report. The report includes things like the cost to utilization for some of those things that I just mentioned. It also includes data around referral patterns and where are they referring people. It includes data around tracking over time hepatitis C, hepatitis B, and HIV cases, as well as a handful of other just figures, how many needles are they giving out? How many needles are they collecting? Where are they doing those types of things?
Great, thank you so much. Commissioners, any questions for Director Manfred?
Well, Director Manfred and I have had this discussion, and one of the primary questions that I have, and I guess it's data that's not easy to collect, but maybe you can address, Director Manfred. The question that I have is, are we actually seeing one of the primary justifications for this program is that that engagement with addicts will actually precipitate a referral to a recovery first step, if you will. I've wanted to see those, and we haven't gotten those. I always think, though, even though we get lots of non-identifiable information where you can have anonymity, but we're not getting that. We're not getting any clear number as to how many people we engage with through the needle exchange program that actually are either referred to or make any attempt at the recovery options available in the community. Maybe you can address that, Lindsay.
I'd be happy to. So the report will address the number of referrals made to treatment. So some of that treatment is medication assisted treatment. Some of that it could be residential, it could be general outpatient with HHS or another facility. And so we are able to, and we are through Provoking Hope collecting data around referrals, including treatment referrals. What we're not able to do is take the number of people or the exact people who are engaging with the syringe exchange program and then saying this many of those individuals went and engaged in treatment. And so the biggest reason for that largely is it's an anonymous program. So I have no way of tracking these individuals and where they go. I know that we've talked about potentially adding a question to our own electronic health record, but I know that even just looking at some of the in the weeds data of what's being collected, not all of the people are coming to HHS for services. So that wouldn't be really capturing a lot of folks. And the reason for that is when we're talking about individuals who are entrenched in addiction to the point where they are, injecting drugs. And especially right now with what we know about fentanyl and the fact that the fentanyl withdrawal process is radically different than and longer than what we typically see. A lot of those individuals who are engaging are really needing a higher level of care than HHS can provide. So we're talking about places like residential facilities, medical management, withdrawal management, or often called detox programs. And so even if we did capture something in the EHR, I'm not confident that it would capture information in its totality. I think what we can rely on is that syringe exchange programs have been studied for decades. I mean, since the 70s and 80s, and we have a lot of data when we do literature reviews where they have been able to do things like actual clinical trials and studies where they are investing a lot of time, resource, and money into studying when they do those things. We can be reassured that when those are occurring, when they've done those studies and they've done them, like I said, for decades, it does show that people who exchange in syringe exchange programs are more likely to take the next step into some level of treatment versus those who don't. I can't certainly can't specify exactly why that is, but what I do know is what we hear from the community, whether they're community partners or people in recovery or people who are not in recovery yet, is that they want people to be going to them. They want us out in the community. They want us out, not in the four walls of where we're at, and out engaging with them. And this is one of those ways that we can do that. It's one of the ways that we can attract them to come to us and take those first steps of building rapport, getting engaged, getting them some wound care, just some of those things to build that relationship so that we can keep on that journey with them in hopes that they do take that next step into the recovery sort of world. And so, and that we're ready for them when they do. So that is really the overarching goal. And the other thing I'll just say is, harm reduction is an important part of any strategy, especially when we're talking about what we're seeing today in our community. It is critical. And it's only one piece, right? We can't do that all by itself and expect there to be any sort of radical change in what we're seeing, but it is an important part. There's a whole spectrum of the services that we offer, everything from prevention that is upstream, primary prevention, talking about things like making sure that families have all the supports that they need to be healthy and happy right from the get-go, to targeted prevention, things like the fentanyl campaigns in schools, treatment options. And then we have these other pieces around harm reduction that are an important piece, but one piece of the spectrum, if you will.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions?
Nope.
Okay. I know that for my own sake, I would be more comfortable signing off on this if I saw and heard the presentation and the follow-up for the 2023 sort of recap on this program. Like I said, we don't fund it directly necessarily, but our names are on the contracts, and I would feel more comfortable seeing those numbers before I sign off on it.
Agreed.
So I'm not sure, Director Manfred, you said early January that you would have that kind of wrapped up. Is that correct?
Right. So we're looking at a year's worth of data. And so since we're not quite through December, so we don't have the December report from our community partner to be able to do the data analysis, it would be incomplete at this time to share with you. So yes, January would be the earliest that we would be able to do that. I do think we should consider, just process-wise moving forward, knowing that the CCO contract is always on this calendar year, how we'd like, we can do this year. I think that we should talk about what might be best moving forward in terms of data analysis, and perhaps we could consider a sort of mid-term or mid-year review of what's happening so that the board can feel prepared for that conversation when this contract comes back before you each December.
Thank you. So, Christian, my understanding that the contract expires December 31st of this year?
Yeah, the term of these contracts runs on the calendar year. That's correct, Lindsay? Yeah. But what will likely happen if it's not approved today and it's approved in January, what generally happens is the contract's approved retroactively to January 1st. Lindsay, I don't know if that will have any impact on the CCO or your office if this is set over until the first meeting in.
I know it's not ideal from the CCO standpoint, but yes, we would be able to manage that on our end.
Is there an option to approve the other elements of this agreement, which includes the other programs? Or would it be best to just leave it intact and then,
I mean, there's certainly no problem from a legal perspective to approve everything except that one item. However, I don't know if, again, if approval without that creates other issues
Okay.
for Lindsay, and if it would just be better to delay the whole approval.
all right, might be less cumbersome.
Yeah, my recommendation would be to just pause on the entirety and come back in January.
Okay, so let's just say, I know it's kind of open-ended based on whenever the report is finalized, but we'll move it to a BOC meeting that is consistent with the report. And I'm fine with it being on the same agenda. I just wanted to hear the updates and the specific numbers. Okay, any further questions, discussion?
None.
Okay. So we will move that forward into the new year, January. And thank you, Lindsay. Thank you for coming on short notice. Let's see, I4 is consideration of approval of amendment number 5 to a provider agreement between Yamhill County Health and Human Services and Yamhill Community Care Organization, Board Order 20-457, updating agreement language and setting rates effective just January 1st, 2024 through December 31st of 2024, subject to final review and approval of County Council's office. Do I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Any further discussion?
None.
All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Aye. All opposed, same sign. Great, motion passes. Thank you. All right, our next item is our public hearing. So why don't we take a quick 5-minute break so everybody can get set up and we will come back for our public hearing. Thank you.
packet for the pick of the chair.
Okay, we are back to what is listed as a public hearing. However, I think it was mischaracterized as one, so we are going to move it onto other business. So the adjustment should reflect that it is item I5, right? I5? Okay. So item I5 of other business is the city of McMinnville requests written notice of election to use sequential UGB review process found under ORS 197.6263 and OAR 660-025-0185. Ken, are you hoping to kick us off here? Okay.
Yes, I'll kick this off. I think Heather Richards' memo does a good job of explaining what the city needs from the county. And she's here if you have any questions related to this topic. I wanted the board to let the board know that I am in support of this sequential review process. It doesn't obligate the county to any decision. It just lays out a different process that would actually be something that I think would be more favorable to the city to be able to go through and deal with the issues that are anticipated to come up with any UGB process. All that's needed is a motion and a vote to authorize me to sign the written notice of election to use sequential review process. And again, if there's any questions, Heather can probably answer
Okay.
those.
I do have a couple questions if you like to come forward. Welcome, and if you could just state your name and address for our meeting record.
Yeah, good morning. So Heather Richards, Community Development Director for the City of McMinnville, 231 Northeast 5th Street. I also have Tom Schauer, our Senior Planner, with me as well.
Welcome. So as part of the documents that we received, there was some discussion about that there was no time to do the quote unquote normal process. Can you kind of unpack that a little bit as to what that means?
Yes, so to back it up for a little bit, as you know, we recently went through a UGB amendment process and brought that to you as the board a couple of years ago in 2020. That was the result of about 25 years of work to get to that point based on a process we started in 1996. Then in 2019, the state passed a new law saying that they were finding that cities were not staying abreast of their growth planning needs. And in the state of Oregon, you need to have 20 years of buildable land within your UGB to support housing, employment, and public land needs. And so they passed a law saying that states need to get updated on their land, on their growth planning process. Because McMinnville had spent so much time on the previous process, the last time we updated a needs analysis was in 2001. So we were, as per that state law, put into the early adopters of a need to do the needs analysis again, start the whole process again. And per the law, we had to have that done by December 31 of 2023, so this year. And we had just finished the work on the previous UGB amendment. Luckily, we had already done a lot of work for the needs analysis, so we had it in draft form and we could update that. But a growth planning analysis has 3 steps in the state of Oregon. First is doing the needs analysis. So identifying how much land need you think you need to support a particular population range. In this case, our population range is 2021 to 2041, about 47,000 plus people that we're planning for. And we have to identify what the housing needs would be, the employment needs, and the public land needs for that. Then the second part of the process is to look at your existing land within the UGB and see if you can make policy changes to accommodate that need. So usually that's looking at more density for housing, looking at different types of job industry that you want to bring in that's higher density jobs to accommodate the job need and the public land need. And then if you still have land supply need after going through that second step, the land use efficiency step, then you go through UGB alternatives analysis, and that's looking at land around your existing UGB for expanding into. The land use efficiencies analysis and the UGB alternative analysis both take a couple of years to do. And we did not have the time to do that, given the state order in 2019 to get the needs analysis done and into them by 2023. The state recognizing that they're trying to sort of expedite growth planning so that cities are keeping abreast of it, created this new process called the sequential UGB process to allow cities to do it incrementally. Previously, when you do a needs analysis and you submit it to the state for acknowledgement, if you show land need within that needs analysis, you have to show how you're going to meet it. So when we submit the needs analysis, we also have to submit, this is how we're meeting that land need. So we would have already done the land use efficiencies and the UGB amendment if necessary. And that typically is, well, for McMinnville, it was 26 years. Most cities, it's 5 to 8 years to get that work done. So it does take some time to get through that process. And so we went to the state when the law came out, they approached us and said, this is where you're going to be in this early adoption stage. We went to them and said, there's no way we're going to be able to get all that work done within that time frame. And they had just passed a sequential process. So we said, we want to be part of that. So early in this whole discussion, we were in dialogue with the state about doing the sequential UGB process. There are 2 other cities that have entered into it in this past year. So it's a new process for the state. We would be the 3rd city entering into it to allow us to do the land use efficiencies next year, and then to do, if necessary, the UGB alternatives analysis in the following year.
Okay. Do you know what those cities are? Who those cities are?
Do we know what those cities are? No, I don't feel I can confidently say that.
I
Do you
don't
know?
know what the other cities are,
Okay.
but I did want to let you know that the city of Newburgh contacted me yesterday and is also interested in this process. You may see a similar request
Yeah.
from them in the
Okay.
next month or so.
Okay. Okay. So you've done the housing needs analysis that was just completed, right? Fairly recently.
Yeah, so we've
Okay.
done the housing needs
Yeah.
analysis, the employment land needs analysis, and the public land needs analysis. So the urbanization report that's in your packet was I think it was in the packet, is a summary of those 3 analyses. They are about 600 pages in total. And they showed a need for about 422 acres of land beyond what is in our existing urban growth boundary, without doing the land use efficiencies and without doing an alternatives analysis.
Okay. So the next step would be the land use efficiencies.
Yeah, so the next
Okay.
step would be spend the next year working with the community and policymakers about what does McMinnville feel like it can comfortably absorb in terms of density for housing and density for employment. These are local choices that the city can make, and finding that that value system that the city wants to move forward with in that regard, applying that to the numbers, and then seeing if that reduces the land need entirely, or if there's still land need, then doing a UGB alternatives analysis.
Okay. Which would be more external.
Yes.
This is where we have to grow. Okay.
Yeah, and it will be similar to the process we did previously. So we'll be looking at around McMinnville, it's all high value farmland. So we'll be looking at farmland through the different priorities and starting with the lowest priority first.
Okay. You had a question?
And, just that the city and the county have to concur and have to actually issue this joint sequential process.
Yes.
We have to
The election.
We have to agree that it's okay for the city to go ahead with this process, and we support the idea of this process.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then what we do is we'll submit a work program to the state. We haven't done that. We submitted in draft form. They have it, and we're working through that with them. And it's the task that you see in that Exhibit A of the resolution. And then right now that we have dates in there that are in red font because they're moving dates as we work through this process. It's really the tasks itself that are critical for the work program. And then we'll put together the dates for that as well
Okay.
with the state.
So part of the reason that the last was an amendment to the UGB, technically, the last process that took 25 plus years. Part of that was litigation, right?
Mhm.
If not most of it. So how is this different in any way in terms of how the public process works? I mean, we don't,
No, so the same process will occur when we submit the needs analysis to previously we submitted all 3 steps to the
Mhm.
state at once, and then the appeal process could be for any of those steps, and it was for
Yeah.
all of them.
Yeah.
And then you work through those issues. With the sequential process, the appeal process will be in place for each step along the way. So we'll submit the needs analysis to the state, we submit it to the director. He reviews it, he can take letters of objection, and then it can go through an appeal process that way.
Okay.
If I can add, it seems like you're taking smaller bites of the apple.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And you're also able to kind of save your work, because sometimes when you get through the process, you'd have to update your numbers and go all the way back through it. And so if you get through one of the steps, then it's saved. You know, you don't have to go back and redo that, which the city has had to do in the past.
Yeah, that's a
Okay.
great point. Thank you.
Okay, so at the end of this, if there's a UGB alternative plan done, there could be an expansion or amendment to the UGB proposed,
Mhm.
but it would have its own public process and all of that still remains.
Yeah, so it
Okay.
would go through the city process, it would go through what's considered the McMinnville Urban Area Management Committee, I think, which is a joint committee of city and county stakeholders, and then it would also come to you as the
Mhm.
board.
Okay. Well, it seems like this is perhaps a good alternative to the rather clunky and lengthy process that currently exists. So, yeah.
Yeah.
Any further questions?
No.
I do want to correct, just for the record, in my staff report, I said that the city on December 12th had approved ordinance number 5141. They've done a first reading of it. They have not done the second reading of it. We've held that off for this process to play out, and then we'll do the second reading for that.
Okay.
And that's to adopt the land needs analysis.
Okay. So I will move approval of Director Friday to approve the written notice of election,
Yeah, to sign the written notice.
to sign the written notice of election, to use the sequential UGB review process. Any further questions or discussion?
None.
Okay. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed, same sign. Great.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thanks, Ken.
Congratulations on 35 years, Ken. Okay, so I think that was it for other business. And we are now on announcements. Got just a couple. Commissioner Starrett and Sheriff Elliott and I participated in the Grand Sharamina Food Bank last weekend, and students from Delphi prepared the Christmas food boxes, which was wonderful. There was a ton of food.
Mhm.
The car line for pickup was, I think they said, a mile long. It snaked through the whole town and took hours to get through. But ultimately, they let us know that we served 214 families, and that's 665 individuals that will now have a holiday meal. And it was great food. I think it was frozen turkeys and just loads of vegetables and carbs, of course. So
Saw bags of oranges.
bags of oranges and apples
Apples,
and
carrots,
pears. And,
squash,
yeah, it
banana,
was amazing.
cabbage.
So I want to thank the 45 volunteers that showed up to help with that. It was great community event to participate in. And then I swung by the Newburgh Dundee PD shop with a cop at Fred Meyer in Newburgh. Wonderful group of folks, almost the entire department, it seemed like was there. And it was really exciting to see some of the kids that were kind of apprehensive at first towards law enforcement officers in scary uniforms. And then by the end of it, they were, high-fiving and smiling and everything. And Canine Tango was a hit. He's such a sweetie. for an apprehension dog, he is just a marshmallow. He was super cute.
Mhm.
And then I just want to give Fred Meyer also a shout out because in addition to having and hosting the event, they also give those families a Christmas meal, holiday meal. They give frozen turkeys or ham or whatever the fixings are. So they go above and beyond, and I just wanted to acknowledge them for that. Any other announcements?
Just also to mention that FFA students were involved in the Grand Cheromina food giveaway. And it was really impressive to see that many kids out there. They have quite a robust program. A couple of other things. The Yamhill County has been chosen by OHA to do a fatality review pilot, which is a subcommittee of the local alcohol and drug policy committee. So we had our first meeting, and really the whole goal is to take a look at where these fatalities, these overdoses are happening and how they can be addressed perhaps more upstream. We had the local government advisory committee meeting last Friday, and we had Dr. Pinels with us. She's the one who issued the psychological opinion regarding aid and assist state hospital patients. So we've been really addressing what do we do at the county level with that. HHS Summit was on Monday, dealing with the long-term sustainability of recovery courts. And we talked to a number of commissioners in what I call the cowboy counties who had probably, I think, the most profound wisdom about addiction. Commissioner Pat Shannon from Gillum County, who himself is in recovery, said, you know what, we're aiding and abetting and we're enabling a lot of our addicts by throwing more money at it. And what we really need is to focus on the 12-step programs, and those are free. And we need to have more of a one-on-one engagement instead of thinking that strangers meeting with them for counseling is going to do as much good. So I just want to say thank you to those who participated in those, and also want to wish everybody a Merry Christmas. I know we've had, it's been a challenging year, but I want to say how much I appreciate our staff and the folks who don't usually get much recognition, but we thank them. And also I want to wish everybody a Merry Christmas as we celebrate the birth of Christ.
Thank you very much, Commissioner.
Distraction. She always
you distracted?
distracts when Mary's talking.
No.
She-
We'll have a conversation
Yep.
later about that.
That's, Sunday, shop with a sheriff.
Yeah. that
I've
was
always supported
amazing.
the program over the years, but this is the first year I actually went in person. Super cool.
Yeah.
So the Shop with a Sheriff program serves 74 kids this year.
Mhm.
$100 gift card, take them around shopping. They're kind of guiding you through. Some have really good ideas what they want. Others you're trying to kind of prompt them a little bit, and $50 is for themselves. Another 50 is for brother, sister, grandparent, mom or dad. Super cool to be a part of. Me and my wife got to go around twice with 2 kids, and definitely gonna do that next year. It
Yeah.
was super fun.
Yeah.
Huge shout out to Sam Elliott. He was the first one out of the gate when the first kid came in, and it was hilarious to watch him. He's almost speed walking to keep up with this kid because he just keeps going around in circles. Says he finds something, he's like, no, I know what else I want. And he is just running him around. I swear I watched him lap Walmart at least 3 times with this one kid. It was awesome to watch.
So funny.
But everybody that's a part of it from the sheriff's office was for that was the search and rescue was there, their group. The volunteer response unit was there, cadet unit, the emergency response team. I saw the ham radio unit, some guys from there. Yeah, Aries was there. Great turnout,
And
lots of volunteers.
City of Yamhill, right?
City Yamhill and Carlton both
Carlton.
came to help out.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice.
Anyway, it was awesome.
Nice.
That was a huge event.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't know that we were actually, went just to check it out, see how things were. And I kind of was walking around just following Sam a few times, and then I'd follow some of the others and ended up going back to the main entrance. Well, there was a slew of kids that came in, And they were starting to run low on volunteers because there's also a gift wrapping station. So they're trying to split volunteers between the two of them. And so me and my wife were standing there and they're like, you want to go around? I'm like, yes, we do, please. And so we.
You
ended
don't
up
want to
going around
gift wrap.
twice.
The gift wrapping is chaos.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Anyway, it was fun.
nice.
Highly recommend. If not, just nothing else, just come and watch it.
Mm-hmm.
You'll get a kick out of it.
All right, any further announcements for the end of the year? No? All right, well, Merry Christmas and Happy New Year to everyone. Safe travels if you're traveling. And we will see you back here in 2024.
Wow.
We are adjourned.